The key to having consistent and precise reloads is being able to size your brass so that your reloads have the proper amount of case neck tension. Perfecting this process will likely do more to improve the performance of your reloads more than anything else you can do. One of the most foolproof methods of setting consistent neck tension is with expander mandrels. Today I'm going to cover some of the new offerings from 21st Century Reloading and show you just how adjusting your case neck tension can affect your process. Measurements of neck tension are often referred to in measurements of interference fit, which is actually completely wrong. People have and will continue to argue in the comment section below that there are better ways to describe it. Especially that guy over there. He can't let anything go. Typically this is done by measuring the neck of a loaded round, then measuring a size piece of brass and subtracting that number from the first number. So you will hear this referred to in 1, 2, or 3 thousandths of neck tension. However, I'm not going to be the one to change this. Someone else needs to fight that battle. Neck tension is truly a factor of many things besides how the case was sized. The neck wall thickness, the seating depth, how clean your necks are, the length of the cartridge neck. Do you have coatings on your projectile? Do you anneal? How many firings are on the brass? The time duration between seating and actually firing the rounds. All these things affect neck tension. Measuring the inside neck dimension is not impossible, but it's not super easy either. You can try and use something like a hole gauge, but if you're trying to get anywhere close to an accurate measurement, you're probably going to end up with something like pin gauges. Whether you choose to use these or not, that's up to you. When you're setting your neck tension, you can take whatever your standard dies give you, or you can adjust your neck tension in several ways. You can get custom honed dies, you can use bushing dies that have interchangeable bushings, or you can use expander mandrels, or a combination of both. Expander mandrels can be used for several functions. They can set the final neck tension on your brass. You can use them to expand necks on new brass, which I'm going to show you some data on here in a minute. You can convert one caliber possibly to another. Say you wanted to open the neck up from 6.5 to 7mm, you can do that. You can even use them to fix damage on brass that has been fired and needs to be opened back up before it's ran through a sizing die. I started testing expander mandrels several years ago after I read about them in a book by Glenn Zedeker called Top Grade Ammo. Understanding how much stronger brass is pushing down rather than pulling a ball back up through was something I had never thought about until I'd read it in that book. Since I've started using expander mandrels, I've heard about them from many top PRS shooters as well as several F-class shooters. Whether you want to give them a try is up to you, but let's look at the options that are available. To use these expander mandrels, you're going to need a die body. My first video covering these, they were stainless steel bodies and stainless steel caps. If you order these today, I think there's 2 different options. They still have a stainless steel body version, but I believe it has an aluminum cap now. I encourage you to check the descriptions in case these things change. But one of the newest options, what they're calling their Gen X expander die body with a viewing window, these are machined out of aluminum and then they're hard-coated for durability. What's really super nice about these is the window, because it makes setting them up so much easier. Don't get me wrong, any of these can be used just fine without a whole lot of difficulty, but when you can see everything that's going on, the operation is so much easier. One thing that I will encourage you, depending on what caliber you're using, they actually offer a long version for bigger cases. So I've got the long version for my 300 Win Mag as well as my 338 Lapua, and then I don't have to worry about smashing the necks of the case into the top of the die. One important point is you can order these with or without the lock rings. That's your decision. So if you've got enough lock rings and you have a preferred type, by all means you can do that. Or you can order them with their lock ring and they work just fine. The decision is up to you. No matter what die body you choose, you're still going to need the expanders, so let's cover the expanders. There's essentially 3 different options. They have standard expanders as well as turning expanders, which are 1 and 2 thousandths under projectile diameter respectively. The standard and turning expanders are now available with a black nitride coating. This is advertised to be as hard as carbide and as slick as graphite. Now, if you're drastically changing the dimension of a case, I still would recommend using lube, but that decision is going to be on you. The third option is caliber-specific expander mandrels. If you really want the ultimate control over your neck tension, the caliber-specific mandrels is probably what you want to look at. These are available in 5 10,000ths increments, and they range from 3 thousandths under to 1 thousandths over your caliber diameter. When it comes to the caliber-specific expander mandrels, currently these are only available in stainless as far as I'm aware. While these caliber-specific mandrels are clearly labeled, if you want to be able to measure them, you're going to need a micrometer. Your standard calipers are just not going to cut it. Typical calibers really only are good to about plus or minus 1 thousandth. Just realize if you want to measure the difference in these, to do it reliably, you're going to need a set of micrometers. Just for fun, I use my micrometers to measure all these, and I'll put a list up on your screen here so you can see what the actual value is and what my measured value was across all of these. When 21st Century sent me these black nitride expanders, they were kind enough to include a caliber kit for 223, so there should be some 223 neck tension testing coming up, where I'm going to be putting these through their paces. I'd already purchased kits for 308 as well as 6.5, and I have some videos on those already, but I'm sure there will be more in the future. If I had to recommend one size that was universally good, typically I would choose 0.002 under your projectile diameter. It's a good place to start. However, on new brass anymore, I have switched to 0.001 under if you're not using some type of a case lube on your case necks. But for my new 6.5 brass, it's clear to me that we have plenty of neck tension using a 263 expander mandrel. But let's look at the data to see why. The graph on your screen comes from 110 pieces of brass that I measured with my amp press. I used the neck turning mandrel, which is 0.002 under projectile diameter, which for 6.5 is 262. And this graph is going to have 3 lines: the average seating force on all 110 pieces, as well as the lowest force value and the highest force value that was seen during the seating process. Looking at the graph, you can see from the lowest force to the highest force, there is quite a range. And the amp press maxes out just under 200 pounds of force here, and so I actually hit that limit and had to seat some of the rounds manually. With this amount of seating force required to seat the projectiles, there's actually small marks being left on the tips of the projectiles, which is less than ideal, but it's not the end of the world. Looking at this graph, you may think that it could not possibly have performed well, but this was plenty effective out to 1,000 yards on 12-inch plates. Sampling 10 rounds before the trip out to 1,000, we had an average velocity of 2730, an extreme spread of 32, and a standard deviation of 10.2. But what about 1,000ths under? Well, this chart is an average seating force of 125 different rounds. Clearly the average seating force using 1,000ths is much lower, but the deviation from round to round is also much less as well. Now the velocities we measured was on a different firearm, so this isn't completely apples to apples. This one had 2 inches more of barrel length, but it still had the identical load of 41.3 grains of H4350 behind 140 grain ELDM. I sampled 15 of these rounds before we took it out to 1,000, and if you want to include the cold bore shot, it had an average velocity of 2762 feet per second, an extreme spread of 28, and a standard deviation of 7.4. If you remove the cold bore shot, the average went to 2763 with an extreme spread of 19 and a standard deviation of 5.9. Please keep in mind, all new brass. This isn't fireformed or anything. Clearly the results were acceptable to me, and this worked just fine out to 1,000 yards with ease. So just pick the expander that's 1,000ths under, right? Well, maybe. But this is what the curve looks like on once fired brass that is resized with a Forcer full-length die with the standard expander removed, and then a 2,000ths expander, so a 262 expander, ran through that neck. The carbon inside the neck will change the seating forces pretty significantly. Sometimes you're just going to need to test to see what works best for your specific process. This is my first time working with these black nitride expanders, and overall, I'm pretty impressed with the finish. The finish is holding up just fine. There's certainly some brass left on them after the sizing process, but I used a little wax after I was done, and most of it came right off. Whether you get an expander that's 2,000ths under, 1,000ths under, or you get the whole kit, knowing the best value that you can use is something you're probably going to have to test. But if you'd like to see what I've done in the past, check out this playlist right here. I've got testing in various calibers from 308 Winchester, 6.5 Creedmoor, 223, and you never know, probably others. If you'd like to support more videos like this, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon, and until next week, stay safe in small groups.